Death is usually equated with the ultimate cessation of existence. The word death in the material, unless explicitly stated otherwise, will be synonymous with eternal, infinite non-existence. Cessation of existence, i.e. the very state of non-existence of someone who once existed, apart from the often unpleasant element of physical agony, is usually viewed in two ways: as something bad or as something completely neutral. Under the premise of the supernatural, the souls of the dead material brains await a cycle of reincarnation, liberation from it, heaven, purgatory, or eternal damnation. Few expect to wake up at the next level of nested simulation, or continue to exist in an uncertain, often unpredictable way. Most non-theists equate death with non-existence. This view presupposes that non-existence is in fact the future of every mind, or rather that no mind exists indefinitely. The perception of non-existence can be threefold. Death can be viewed as inherently bad, neutral, or good. However, I am not concerned with the nature of death, but with its practical perception and reasons behind it. In practice, it is difficult to get rid of the intuitive feeling that death is bad. More specifically, death is bad for the dying person. Most people settle for this seemingly common sense conclusion. Fear of death and negative evaluation of it are so deeply ingrained in the human psyche that getting rid of them may be impossible for many, even after presenting convincing arguments. This doesn't mean that death is definitely not a bad thing. However, I believe that there are good arguments for a minority's intuitive view that death is nothing bad. The existence of unfulfilled desires is the driving motive behind every mind. Fear of suffering is the most intense driving force, and dying by default, i.e. in the natural environment, is often associated with the worst suffering in life. It is not uncommon for the mind, which arises as a survival tool, to follow a gradient of unmet needs, headed by avoiding harm, as it often simplifies reality by associating death with suffering. Death itself, as the end of all feeling, is not any suffering for the individual. The death process basically is. This makes the painful dying something undesirable, but it says nothing about death itself. Humans are a social species. We have an impact not only on ourselves, but also on the tribal group of which we are an essential part. Considering the environment in which human psychology developed, it is rather uncontroversial observation. Currently, the lack of tribal groups doesn't mean no ties, everyone has relatives. Our condition has a direct and indirect impact on the people around us, on those closest and loved. Therefore, considering death in isolation from this context is difficult, as a broader, family perspective is integral to our psyche. The death of a family member in a tribal group, especially the death of a healthy and young individual, is a tragedy for the group, reducing its chances of success. The development of psychological mechanisms ensuring that death is viewed as an undeniable tragedy is not surprising, nor it is unusual that such an element of the world model has been memetically successful. It is hard to imagine a stable society that would not consider particularly premature death undesirable. The death of a family member is currently an event that evokes intense emotions and forces loved ones to remodel their lives because of abrupt change, instability, and loss of support. The death of a parent, child, friend, or other loved one is often a devastating event, leaving us in long-term mourning and sense of loss of something unimaginably precious. But can it be inferred that death was bad for the one who died? All the suffering felt because of death is in the feelings of living people. Exactly zero suffering is felt in non-existence. Exactly zero needs are both present and unfulfilled. Unfulfilled needs for stability, closeness, and safe future with someone we love are the domain of those who exist. If we only consider the existence of suffering or unmet needs as bad, I see no logical possibility that non-existence should be bad for the one who has finished existing. Death is bad only for those who have lost something, in whose life there is a void in the shape of a lost person. Death may be viewed as undesirable if there is a chance to make the family unhappy, but that is not enough to make death something bad outside the context of social dependence and the balance of suffering caused solely to others. But what about the intuitive belief that we have an interest in continuing to exist? that our future life is full of plans and dreams, and that it would be wrong to deprive us of the possibility of fulfilling our desires, or that we just want to live, so it would be bad to die. This view is presented, among others, by Benatar, and seems very common in the white debate. Death deprives us of the ability to achieve the goals we care about. Death makes it impossible for us to be fulfilled and happy. We will not implement our plans and make our dreams come true. Beautiful moments, valuable events, relief and bliss will become impossible. We will be deprived of them forever, just like of any other life achievement and satisfaction. This is undoubtedly wrong. So death, cessation of existence, is also something negative and undesirable, even if it can only be delayed and not defeated. One aspect particularly strikes me in this reasoning. Certainly, depriving someone of the possibility of feeling happy, fulfilled, or achieving goals is perceived negatively. The resulting feeling of non-fulfillment is unequivocally wrong, as minds tend to reduce perceived non-fulfillment. Non-fulfillment, however, can only be felt if there are real desires. I think that the belief that death can be bad because it deprives us of something is in the end a sophisticated absurd. Suppose there is an exotic mind whose most important goal is to make a research expedition to a tropical island covered with ancient jungles. Achieving this goal will provide our experimental subject exorbitant satisfaction, and failure to do so will result in a devastating dose of non-fulfillment. We assume that we are not judging this desire. It is relatively ordinary in the experimental world. For some reason, the object is deprived of the possibility of fulfilling this desire, or it suddenly becomes very unlikely to be fulfilled. For example, research expeditions to tropical islands require skills that our object cannot possess, or researches are prohibited. There is suffering because we have been deprived of an opportunity. But was it a direct harm to deprive us of the possibility of the trip? Or to make it impossible for us to achieve our dream was a real harm? What if our subject was offered a transfer to the virtual world, under conditions that would not imply any suffering for her, the world, or her relatives, e.g. the whole family moves voluntarily and no one regrets it, with the possibility of having an identical, like in the primal world, of a full-blown research expedition? In such a situation, would a simulated expedition be any worse than an unsimulated one? Would it be better to stay in the primeval world without fulfillment? What if the object was unknowingly moved to the simulation? What if she had previously announced that it was against her will? What if, after learning the truth, she thought the choice was right? What if the proposition is different? The craving can be removed either by non-invasive surgery or by short-term psychotherapy and replaced by another, less ambitious, but with the same level of fulfillment. Would it be irrational to refuse to turn a hard-to-achieve dream into a possible or an easier one? What if the swap was immediate but against your will? What if you are offered to remove the craving altogether without replacing it with anything else? The level of fulfillment jumps to its maximum because of ordinary life. Is the absence of desire a bad thing now? Was it irrational to deprive yourself of it? Is the unfulfilled desire or the unfulfillment itself an undesirable state? In fact, achieving long-term, stable fulfillment is impossible. Dissatisfaction is what counts. The existence of desires means the existence of unmet needs and therefore metaphysical unfulfillment. Reducing the lack of satisfaction is the only thing we can achieve, and also the only thing that anyone ultimately cares about. Otherwise, it should be said that the state that is maximally fulfilled is insufficient, because one can always create new desires that must be satisfied. Feeling 100% fulfilled in a virtual paradise, we should increase the number of desires in order to be able to fulfill more desires, as the sum of satisfaction should be increased. It is only possible to deprive someone of anything if there are unfulfilled desires for it. If our experimental mind had realized in a sudden flash of enlightenment that she didn't need to go to an exotic island and she could satisfy her desires otherwise, such as by creating, destroying, or meditating, we wouldn't consider it tragic to lose previous desire. If she had stopped wanting and it hadn't been associated with any other kind of non-fulfillment, there would be nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, the non-fulfillment would be reduced. If it were to change the desire or remove it against will, I don't see the difference. However, the issue of respecting the will of others is a very broad topic and requires a separate material. In the case of death understood as cessation of existence, the key fact is that there can be no deprivation because there are no desires that could need to be satisfied. Without the existence of desires, the need for fulfillment ceases to exist. Deprivation is bad explicitly because it implies non-fulfillment. In the future, there will be a person who is deprived of something, and this is a disadvantageous state for her. In the event of death, there is no longer a person who can experience the unfulfillment, so it is not rational to say that in any morally significant sense, the one who dies is deprived of anything. If this were not the case, there are indications that every non-existent being is deprived of a potential beautiful future. Therefore, while being able to provide a relatively joyful life, it is not only advisable to create it. Creating a satisfied life is a moral obligation. It is in the sense that it is wrong not to create it. The entire future of civilization should be focused on the wholesale production of relatively positive beings. I do not find this line of reasoning meaningless under certain assumptions, but I am not convinced by it. So on the argument that death is wrong because it is in our best interest to continue to exist, I disagree with it. I believe that the interest of every mind is solely to reduce unfulfillment. The interest in acquiring resources to meet subsequent needs is understandable. Surviving human minds can reduce unmet needs mainly by meeting them. The instrumental goal for this is survival, therefore the continuation of existence. It is also a mechanism that makes our existence possible. Achieving a complete absence of needs, however, is, according to my current beliefs, impossible, and if it were possible, the choice between death and life would have to become completely indifferent, as the need for life is eliminated. Many would probably find that this would be almost the same as being dead. By arguing that we have an interest in the continuation of existence and therefore death is wrong, we assume that existence is something desirable in itself. I find it only an instrument and painfully inefficient for our true purpose, reducing any form of unfulfillment. Paradoxically, it is not even in our interest to have an interest to live, nor is it to have any desires. If it were otherwise, and it is the fulfillment of desires, not the level of unfulfilled desires, that matters, the creation of both new desires that should then be immediately fulfilled, and the creation of new entities for the same purpose should be the moral goal of mankind. Summing up, non-existence, synonymous with death in this material, for the sake of simplicity in the analyzed context, is a lack of any subjectivity. Without implying neither suffering nor the existence of unfulfilled desires, it cannot be a bad condition for the individual because of this. Death cannot deprive anyone of anything either, because it essentially is ceasing the existence of a person who could be deprived of anything. If death could deprive of something, or if there were something metaphysically good, i.e. all positives were not merely a reduction of metaphysical dissatisfaction resulting from the existence of desires, philosophical hedonism should be taken as a determinant and moral goal of creating happy beings, making it even a priority over preventing suffering of already existing entities. Non-existence before death and post-mortem non-existence after death are no different, being like the evening star and the morning star the same. Already non-existent people and people who would never be born are harmed in the same way.